front has opened in the fight over abortion policy since a federal judge in Texas issued a ruling that invalidates FDA approval of mifepristone, a common abortion medication used early in pregnancy that threatens to take the drug off the market nationwide. In Washington, Representative Annie Kuster is joining the fray by sponsoring legislation to protect access to the drug. Congresswoman is our guest this morning on Close Up. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Adam. Thank you.
So we already see the courts going back and forth on this, from Texas to now the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals restoring some access, I think, to the 7th week of pregnancy when it has usually been at the 10th week of pregnancy. First, your thoughts on sort of just where we're at in this post-Roe world and the discussion that's going on right now.
Yeah, you can see the impact. This is throwing the whole question up in the air again, and that's why I have voted for the Women's Health Protection Act in Congress to make sure that all women will have access to the full range of reproductive health, including abortion, including medication abortion. This was one judge in Texas. He made the decision to throw out the FDA approval, which, Adam, is over 20 years old. This drug is completely safe. People say safer than Tylenol, fewer deaths than Tylenol. And he's just substituted his personal, frankly, political opinion for the science behind this medication. And so now women across this country are wondering, can they get the access to health care that they need in their decision? And you know, the way I come at this, Adam, is very much live free or die. New Hampshire, sort of a libertarian streak. Over 3/4 of people in my district believe in a woman's right to choose, believe in access to reproductive health care. That's her decision. We shouldn't have government interference in people's personal, private decisions.
What would your new piece of legislation do in terms, in relation to the mifepristone drug?
Will allow this to be available under its FDA approval, make sure that it's available throughout the country, and that it's available by mail, so that a physician can prescribe the medication, people can have access to the medication, and they can take the steps that they need for their own reproductive health. And another angle on this, really, when you think about a judge throwing out an FDA approval, no scientific research in his courtroom, no hearing on the efficacy or the science behind it, this could be coming after your cancer drug, coming after your prostate drugs. You know, everybody's got to be concerned about this type of decision.
Let's stay in the legal world for a bit. You're an attorney. What do you think of the case that's been brought in by the Manhattan DA against former President Trump, essentially alleging that business crimes have taken place to cover up a federal crime which has not yet been proven?
Well, so here's the bottom line. We have the former president, we have payments to a porn star. That, ironically, is not illegal under state law in New York State. But what is illegal is that next step, the fraudulent business records, not reporting, not, and I think there's more to the case, actually, because I think there's going to be a link either to campaign finance, where this wasn't reported, or to tax law, where maybe a deduction was taken. It was a fraud that was perpetrated pretending that these payments were to Michael Cohen as a legal retainer, when in fact they were not. It was not for legal services rendered. And so that's the underlying crime, is the business fraud under New York law.
Some have argued that this is, the sports equivalent of a ticky-tack foul compared to January 6th, compared to the case in Georgia. Is there a political concern here that, for people who oppose President Trump, as you do, that if he essentially gets out of this case, that he's going to use that as a springboard to say, hey, the rest of this against me is all fake and illegitimate as well?
Well, look, I think patience is a virtue. We've got this case coming in Georgia for the interference with the election results. We have the Jack Smith investigation by the DOJ into the January 6th insurrection in the Capitol and the president's role in inciting the insurrection. And And so I think let this play out. I'm not concerned. I have faith in our judicial system, and I have faith in the rule of law and in our courts.
One last question in the realm of the legal world. A huge discussion going on right now in Washington around Senator Shaheen Hassan's nomination for the federal bench. Michael Delaney, a former AG here in New Hampshire. Some controversy over his position on abortion. He's also faced questions over his conduct in a sexual assault case here in New Hampshire. If you were in the Senate, would you be voting to confirm Mr. Delaney?
Well, it's a great question. Look, I'm not in the Senate. I'm not involved in this decision. What I would say, I'm very, very concerned about survivors. I know Chessie Proud. I know her well. And my role in the House is to support survivors and obviously to support access to health care, including abortion care. So I think these are top of mind issues for the Senate, and I think it's very fair that they take all of these considerations into account making their decision on that vote.
What do you think of the Biden administration's proposed new Title IX rules that would essentially make it illegal across the country for states to ban transgender athletes from participating, in particular in women's collegiate athletics?
Right. I think what the ruling was actually saying that decisions could be made with regard to whether there's a fairness aspect or a safety aspect, and I think that's where we should be in this debate. I don't think we should have a total ban, but I also think that there may be reasons that we have not yet considered that should be taken into account. But look, where I come down on this really, I think, is as a mom, let kids be kids. We're talking about a handful of people across the entire country. And I think this has become some type of rallying cry with these extreme MAGA Republicans that are just taking their eye off the ball of what we want our schools to be is well-funded. We want them to be safe. Frankly, I'd be a lot more concerned about the gun violence in schools than I am what's happening with some teenagers' identity. And let's make sure that kids go off to school and learn and create a really thriving environment for them. It's very hard nowadays to be a young person, to be a teenager, online pressures, etc. Let's just let kids be kids.
You mentioned the online pressures. You recently participated in the hearing with the CEO of TikTok, of course, very popular social media app with young people that has come under some scrutiny for possible influence from the Chinese Communist Party. First of all, do you think there is a nefarious purpose here, that China is using TikTok to harm America's youth?
I have to say, Adam, it was a fascinating hearing in our Energy and Commerce Committee, 5 hours with the CEO of TikTok on the stand. Look, there was a lot of questions from both sides of the aisle about the connection to the Chinese Communist Party, and the CEO was not able to deny or deflect the direct questions. What is the influence of the Chinese Communist Party on your business activities, and who do you report to? You know, that was the bottom line. And so that was a big concern. My line of questioning was, again, back to the safety of our youth. Line of questioning around reports that I've heard of sex trafficking and people, literally a story of an older man that got in a plane and flew to where a young girl lived and was in her neighborhood. I mean, come on, let's protect young people, let's protect children. And so I have not yet made a decision where I'll end up on TikTok. I'm very interested in people's response from the district. I know there are small businesses that do rely upon this technology. And, you know, I keep chiding myself. I don't want to be the person that says, oh, what do you mean we're going to carry a computer in our pocket? Like, you know, someday this may turn into something that everybody relies on. It's not insignificant, 150 million Americans using this platform.
And yet, you know, take off the Congresswoman hat. You're a mom. Your kids are grown. If you still had underage children, would you let them use this app?
Absolutely not. And certainly, you know my background. My heart goes out to young girls, young boys that might be in a situation where they could be compromised sexually and, you know, just their safety. And so to me, the risk of that is very high.
Let's check in on the First in the Nation primary briefly. Republicans, it's very active. Democrats, it's, bubbling a little bit here and there too. On that Democratic side, you have Robert Kennedy Jr. getting into the race. Some in your party have raised concerns that he might use the platform of the First in the Nation primary to spread misinformation about vaccines. Do you share those concerns?
I absolutely do. I have not been a fan of his position, just blanket anti-vaccine across the board. Look, I want safety in our vaccine system, and I worked very hard on the health subcommittee throughout COVID to make sure we had the research, that we had the FDA approvals. But I think he has been known to, excuse me, traffic in misinformation, and I would be very concerned if he took advantage of our New Hampshire primary for that purpose.
One last question on the primary. Do you agree with the effort at the State House to try to take the First in the Nation primary law, the law that keeps New Hampshire first, and put it in the state constitution? So this is sailing through, but if it goes to the people, it's got to get 66%. Do you think there's a risk that maybe the population at that level doesn't support it?
I mean, it's possible. And look, I think the law is the law, and that's what we intend to follow. We're very disappointed in the decision, frankly, by the Democratic National Committee thus far. I don't think it's over. We're still in conversations. I've had direct conversations with the president twice now saying, you've got nothing to fear. Come to New Hampshire, run, you'll win handily, clear the field, and move on. No need to throw New Hampshire under the bus. I understand there were concerns about the way Iowa ran the caucuses, and I think that decision has been made. But, let's move on. We can have an inclusive, diverse process with the first 4 or 5 states, and then let's elect the strongest candidate to be our nominee for President of the United States.
We'll see how it shakes out.
I sure hope so.
Congresswoman Annie Kuster, thanks for joining us.
Adam, great to be with you.
And